Today on the show, we have Louie Woodall. Louie is the founder of Climate Proof. Climate Proof is a publication that pushes forward the conversation about climate adaptation. What is climate adaptation? Well, that's exactly what we talk about on the episode, as well as more theoretically, what place media has in the ecosystem of climate tech, clean tech, along with founders, funders, policymakers, academics, those that typically get more attention, the media outlets, and also what role language plays in pushing forward change. Please do not forget to subscribe not only to this channel, turn on your notifications so you know when these episodes drop, but also to the newsletter where I will go deeper into the topics explored in this conversation. And thank you to our partners, Clean Tech Growth Lab. If you want to grow in clean tech, those are the experts. If you want to grow in any other industry, it's Craze and Friends, the producer of this podcast. And now for Louie. Louie, welcome.
Hi, Blake. Great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
I'm so glad that you're here. I've been after Louie, and Louie is a very busy man doing very interesting things. And so finally accepted the introduction. So for all the people that don't know yet, if you give a brief introduction of yourself and what you're building.
Yes, thank you, Blake. So I run the publication Climate Proof, and that is all about climate adaptation, which is how businesses, governments, individuals, communities are building protection against climate impacts, preparing for ever worsening extreme weather disasters, getting ready for how the environmental system, the hydrological system, the climatic system are going to change because of the increase of fossil fuel usage and greenhouse gases in the environment. So it's a newsletter, it's a podcast. I also have a number of data products, and the focus is really on how this adaptation imperative is going to drive economic change and social change over the next 10, 20, 50 years.
So, burning question that I circled, put, like fireworks around and stuff like that. You were very adamant about the fact that you focus on adaptation versus any other angle that you could in the climate space. Why is that the case?
So I think, well, look, if global warming is the inconvenient truth, right, which Al Gore spoke about years ago, then climate adaptation is kind of the unavoidable reality we're in right now. But it seems to be a reality we are choosing not to look at directly. So there's a lot of focus in climate media, in climate policy on mitigation, right? So this is reducing fossil fuel usage, turning to renewables, etc. And that's really, really important. But the sad truth is that even if we cut out all fossil fuel usage today, the amount of warming gases in the atmosphere today are going to create impacts that will continue for the next 10, 20 years, right? We are going to see, as we have seen this year, increase in extreme weather disasters or extreme weather-related disasters like the LA wildfires, like Hurricane Helene, like the massive floods in Europe and Pakistan, and typhoons in Southeast Asia. Those are going to continue. We're also going to see temperatures continue to rise. They're already around the 1.5 degree level, and they're going to rise more. And that is going to bring a whole new degree of stresses to the way we live our lives, to businesses, to how we actually allocate capital around the world. So it's unavoidable that we're going to have to adapt to the climate. But it seems to me, and I wonder if your listeners would agree, that we're still very much focused on, if we just cut emissions, everything's going to be fine. We can get back to living our lives as we wanted to back in the 90s or the 80s, whatever it was. And sadly, that's not true. And that's not the reality we're in. So I wanted to focus solely on adaptation because I think it is overlooked. And we need to get to grips with the technologies, the policies, and the processes, and the kind of uncomfortable changes we're going to have to make in order to survive and thrive over the next 50, 100 years.
So I have a related question that's also circled in fireworks here. But before we get to that one, I'm curious if you, as a child, you woke up every day and said, I cannot wait to be a journalist, a content producer. I can't wait to write. How did you get into doing this?
I've always loved to write. Yes, I was one of those kids at school who I enjoyed doing the long essays, right, instead of doing the artworks and doing the practical stuff or the sports class. I'd like to my written English classes, my history classes. So I very much enjoyed that. And at university, I was part of the school paper, which was a real eye-opening experience. It was great fun, talking to smart people, getting them interested in you, and you being interested in them, and yes, kind of distilling complex information for different audiences. And I suppose I also love the writing side of it. I don't think I've ever been brilliant on the on the reporting side. I think real good reporters have to be really annoying and keep hammering away at contacts and go to all the parties. And I did that for a while, but I think what I really love is getting complex information and writing about it in a way that's engaging, that really conveys meaning to people who can actually make use of what I'm writing about. So yeah, I suppose it started in school. I always loved to write, always loved to read, and then doing some journalism at University of London, that kind of made me think, oh, I could do this for sure. And yeah, it's gone on from there.
Has it always, similarly, has it always been a dream of yours to, I guess, either run your own business or within this context, run your own publication like you are, or is it something that just evolved over time?
It's a good question. I feel like the time was right for me to go off on my own and do my own enterprise, right? My experience has been, career experience so far has been working at like a medium-sized company, which is good. It was comfortable. All the mod cons of being in a good-sized business that's making money. But it was a bit stifling after a certain amount of time, right? It was quite clear that the ladder was kind of going to be blocked at the top. And then I went to work for a startup, my first ever startup I worked at, venture capital backed startup, and you kind of think there's going to be some secret formula you're not aware of, but then I realized through that experience that everybody's kind of like making it up as they go along, right? Building the aircraft as it's flying, which is the old startup trope, right? And I thought, well, okay, so there's no like magic formula, there's no like secret sauce. It is kind of having a good idea, executing on it well, finding that product market fit, and going for it and putting the hard yards in. So once I realized that working at the startup, I thought, okay, yeah, I'm gonna try and do this myself. Gotcha. And I do love the flexibility. I do love being my own boss. I don't love the insecurity and the ups and downs, but maybe I do, because you get the adrenaline rush when things go well, and you get the kind of need to be creative when things don't go so well. And I think it's a way to challenge yourself that sometimes you don't get in other environments.
So high level, could you walk through just so you were working for a company for a period of time, how long that was, and then you said you worked at a startup, how long that was, and then how long have you been running your own? Yeah,
so out of college, I started working for a business-to-business financial media company called Incisive Media, it was then, and I worked for the publication called Risk.net, which is very focused on financial regulation, risk management at banks and asset managers, really nerdy stuff, right? I think one of my colleagues called it the nerdy big brother of the Wall Street Journal, and it really was very, very targeted at a very kind of elite user base within the biggest banks in the world. And it was tough stuff, kind of getting to grips with this content, the complexity of that world, right? And this was a few years after the financial crisis, so there was a lot of change going on in that world. So it was really engaging, really interesting. But I was traditional. I went from reporter to staff writer to an editor role. So that company really looked after me, really helped me kind of understand how to be a journalist, how to talk to contacts, how to put articles together, how to create a good story. And it's to them that I have to thank for where I am right now in New York, because I started out in London, but this being a financial media publication, they obviously had offices in New York. Sure. I got to visit here first in 2014, fell in love with New York, and then I asked for a transfer, and they enabled that. So I've been in New York now for 10 years, and for about 5 of those years I stayed with that company, with Incisive Media, and then parted ways with them 2020, 2021, amiably, because I had this opportunity at a climate tech startup, right? And I've been very interested in writing about climate change ever since like 2018, 2019. And the true story is that in 2019, I believe it was, that was when Greta Thunberg, the great environmental activist, climate activist, she came to New York City. And actually, I'm right by the Hudson River here, right, in Battery Park City. And her boat came up here with a kind of like escorting flotilla of boats. And I saw her land. I got to see her speak. And I thought, this 16-year-old or 15-year-old she was back then, she's doing all this on climate, and I'm not going to suddenly try to become a climate scientist or become an activist. But I did think I wanted to use my journalistic skills and my interests in writing to kind of further the climate change agenda, if you want to call it that. So that's when I started writing, first of all, about climate change and how it impacted on financial institutions and financial markets. So that was my first kind of engagement with climate change writing. And through those writings that I did on the side of my desk, that's how I got to the attention of this climate tech startup. And I got snapped up by them and worked for them from 2021 to 2023. The company's called Manifest Climate. It's still around. It's now an ESG data reporting and kind of analysis company. But back then it was more firmly focused on climate. And they were excited about building out an editorial function within their platform. So that's why I was brought on board. So I was with them for like 3 years. I worked from home, from New York. They were based in Toronto in Canada. And I kind of got a taste then, I suppose, for remote work and being flexible and all that jazz. And then, things came to an end there at Manifest in 2023. And I thought, right, I'm going to, instead of bouncing straight into another job, I thought I'm going to do some consulting, going to do some freelancing and see if I can make climate proof into a thing.
And here we are. So two things. One is specifically with your experience with climate proof, you just outlined, and thank you for doing that. The timeline there. What you could say. What is one or two of the most impactful things that you took from either both or one of those experiences that impact how you navigate climate proof now?
So I think from my experience at Incisive Media, working for Risk.net, I had really good editors, right? So I owe to my editors, Duncan and Chris and Rob and Michael, a lot about how to put a complex story together in a digestible format for an audience, right? So understanding how to put together a story, understanding what matters to audiences, I think that how to make the product, essentially, I got from them. And I think the key thing of being a journalist has always been curious and open and always being aware of other people's biases, right? And I think sometimes it's easy to forget that, and especially when you become more pally with certain contacts, it's easy to forget. But you got to always remember, like, where's this person coming from? Are they talking their own book? What are their motivations for talking to you in the first place? So kind of understanding why people talk to journalists and distilling that bias, understanding that bias, that's definitely one big lesson I got from working at Risk.net. From Manifest Climate, I think, the old startup adage of moving fast, pivoting fast, jumping on things, taking extreme action very quickly. I think that is a skill I didn't have before, because working at a mid-sized company, things are a bit slower. There's committees, there's different layers. Whereas startup, it's much more seat of your pants and things can turn on a dime, right? And I think I learned, all right, I'm going to try this business model, try to build this revenue stream, do X, Y, Z. Okay, that's not working brilliantly, so I'm going to pivot or I'm going to adjust it. So not being so afraid to like try things and drop them, or try things and pivot them quite quickly, right? Because I think sometimes you can get stuck in the mindset like, okay, I'm going to be a subscription newsletter. Right? Climate Proof is going to be fully subscription based. I'm going to get people to pay tens, hundreds of dollars to read my stuff because I'm that damn good. And I'm not going to need advertising. I'm not going to need sponsored content. And then it's like, okay, that's not happening. So let's try and do sponsored content. And that has been something I'm new to, but I've built out, and I feel it's working well for me. But it took some learning, took some tweaking on the side to kind of get a model together. But I think, not having the stubbornness to be like, okay, I'm going to carry on with this idea no matter what. I think working at Manifest Climate, working at a climate tech startup kind of gave me an understanding about the importance of pivoting and not being afraid to swerve when things don't go your way.
Well, so something that was interesting about something I think me and definitely a lot of people are less familiar with is that concept of keeping the bias in mind. And so what do you mean by, like, how is it that impacts the content that you ultimately create? Is it the fact that when you interview people and you receive answers to the questions, you have to take it through a filter before you release it? How does that manifest in your workflow?
Yeah, you have to filter it. I mean, what's really exciting about climate adaptation is it's kind of a new theme, right? It's still not very well understood.
Right.
And there's lots of efforts by different parties, philanthropies, venture capital firms, corporates, to kind of shape what adaptation means, and for their own purposes, right? Some investors want adaptation to be an investable theme that they can like create investment products off the back of, exchange traded funds, all that sort of jazz. Some VCs, they're obviously trying to attract funds from LPs, from family offices, and so they're trying to say that adaptation is one thing. Philanthropies are saying adaptation is another thing. So you kind of have to understand like what are the motivations for this person for promoting this particular idea of climate adaptation, right? So you have to kind of be like, okay. And when I write, sometimes you always have to say, so and so is a VC investor who focuses on this thing. You can't just say this guy is a expert in adaptation. You can't put that out there. You have to put the context around it, and then people at least then know where these views are coming from. And yes, trying to provide, the question of balance is always important in journalism, and I think everything's blurring in that domain in this modern world, right? Think about all the substacks and the kind of either ideologically or I don't know, sort of like, I don't want to say biased, but like tilted publications out there talking about important concepts. And look, I write about climate change. I believe in climate change, obviously. I don't have any time for climate denialists. I actually do believe we should be promoting climate adaptation. We need adaptation news and insights to be more widely circulated, so we are prepared for climate shocks, for worsening climate disasters. So I have that's my bias, I suppose, and I don't hide that. But yeah, when writing an article or trying to provide some news, you got to always remember like, what is this person selling? What has this person wanted to get out of me, and what do they want to get out of my audience?
Yeah. So something interesting, and we'll just go right into it because I had it anyway, is that I think the way that you speak about climate adaptation is similar to what you could say about, sustainability today, but it's definitely the concept or the word of sustainability, I don't know, 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, where it was this thing where people wanted to bring into it was kind of a newer term, and it was popping up in different places, and people were using it in different ways. And like you're saying, shaping the narrative of sustainability to serve whatever their priorities were. So could you go in a little bit more detail about what the state of adaptation, or from your perspective, or where it's at, how people are using it, what the useful ways to think about it and the useful ways to use it are versus ways that are not so useful or misinformed?
Mm. Well, the big debate I've been having this year is we have climate adaptation and we have climate resilience. And are they the same thing? You might have heard those terms put together, adaptation and resilience, A and R. And I actually ran a survey of my readers this year to kind of ask about what is adaptation, what is resilience, right? So that we can try and come up with a common definition. And we came up with the idea that adaptation are the actions you take to adjust systems or processes to deal with a changing climate. Climate resilience, is the kind of the state of being, right? You are a resilient individual if you are, healthy, if you've got a good diet, if you've got some savings in your bank account, that makes you resilient to shocks that could happen to you, right? Health-wise, physical, financial, you lose your job, you've got your savings, that makes you resilient. That's a state, right? Similarly, like a building is climate resilient if a number of climate adaptation actions have been taken to make it resilient to worsening winds, to extreme heat, etc. So I think we've come to an agreement, at least in my community, and it seems like it's getting into the wider climate community as well, as that adaptation are kind of actions, the step-by-step things you have to do, and resilience is the end goal we're striving for, right? So if you're climate resilient in a 2-degree world, that's great, but then you have to take more actions to become resilient in a 3-degree world, right? It's a never-ending process. So I think that's the first thing I'd say, is that we seem to be arriving at a common understanding of what adaptation is vis-a-vis resilience and vis-a-vis mitigation, right? Which is just decarbonization, reducing fossil fuel usage, reducing greenhouse gases being pumped into the atmosphere. But I would say we're still a long way from having adaptation really embedded in business and finance, right? In the kind of climate advocacy, climate politics world. So think about COP30 that just happened in Brazil. There was a lot of discussion of climate adaptation, right? Especially because developing countries are the ones that are suffering the most from climate shocks. Think about Hurricane Melissa devastating Jamaica this year. Think about the floods in Pakistan. Think about the typhoons hitting Indonesia and the Philippines. So at the international climate diplomacy level, adaptation is a big deal, right? And there's a lot of discussions about how do we get funds from rich countries to poorer countries to support adaptation. So there's a lot going on in that world. But if you look at the global north, especially in businesses, financial institutions, we're still not seeing adaptation taken up as much as sustainability was 10 years ago, or even like net zero was 5 years ago, right? Remember, there was net zero alliances for every sector under the sun 5 or 6 years ago. And we haven't had the same kind of upspringing of alliances and initiatives for adaptation. And maybe because a lot of those net zero alliances, etc., fell upon hard times, got caught up in political fights, culture wars, and we don't want to make the same mistakes with adaptation. But I also think it's because adaptation is this kind of, until recently, a more woolly concept, right? What do you mean by adaptation? What do you mean by resilience? And I think now we're getting to the point where, look, these are actions you can take, your business can take to become resilient to climate shocks. We need to still create a market where you have people providing those solutions and a clear kind of user case within corporations, businesses, governments, a clear user who wants to buy those goods and services, right?
Okay. Yeah, no, well, yeah, because I think it's a really interesting conversation to me. The usage, I mean, this happens in any space, but obviously in the climate tech, climate change, whatever space, there's a lot of terms that people throw around to. And that could be really useful, but the misuse of those words is like sustainability, like we're talking about. They can be used to greenwash on super on levels of super big corporations because they're just trying to make a sale, and they're able to do that. But if sustainability was used correctly, it would help push agendas forward. And so, in an ideal state. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that in an ideal state, just the word sustainability, like the concept net zero, these things could be really potent, but over time there's a curve of them being adopted and used in culture wars and things like this that dilute their effectiveness. And so adaptation, the way that you're framing it, the way that I understand it, seems to be at a point where it still has the potential to be something very positive and very impactful, and it also has the potential to end up similarly to the sustainability net zero. So how is it that you see this concept of adaptation? Well, first of all, what is the end state that is ideal for a term, for a concept like adaptation, and how is it that we increase the chances of it ending up there?
Yeah, there's a tension, right? Because on the one hand, we want adaptation to be kind of incorporated as business as usual, right? So you are seeing this in some of the policy proposals coming out of the European Union, right? Like they want to make adaptation to climate risks part of every decision they make, budgetary, infrastructure build out, any regulation they write. They want adaptation to be interwoven with everything they're doing. And when you think about how every sector is going to be affected by climate change, agriculture by drought, by increased pests because of migrating patterns changing because of increasing heat. Then you think about how residential real estate, commercial real estate is going to be affected by changing flood risk, right? Every sector has a different kind of intersection with climate risks, and they're all going to have to come up with different solutions to adapt. And that means it can't kind of be done top down. There needs to be solutions coming up from the bottom from each of these sectors, right? So we do need adaptation to be embedded into business as usual. When you're making an investment decision, when you're deciding to contract a company or get a new supplier, you have to always be thinking, okay, how is this partner, this supplier, this customer going to be affected by climate risks? That should be automatic, right? That's where we want to get to, I think. But on the other hand, because adaptation is still kind of woolly and misunderstood, and I think a lot of people still think climate adaptation, no, we talk about extreme weather risk, or we talk about, acts of God, force majeure, like, shucks, what are we going to do about it? That mentality needs to change, and that's why we still want to push adaptation as a concept, I feel. We kind of need to get these words into people's heads, and we need them on the slide decks that are shown to board CEOs and shown to politicians and shown to philanthropies who are raising funds for climate finance reasons. We kind of need to have this category of adaptation created so people can really kind of grapple with it, but then we kind of need the solutions to be taken from the sectors themselves from the bottom up and brought upwards. So it's kind of a challenge there, and right now in the US it's really interesting, and I'm sure you've seen this in other climate discussions, right? Language has changed a lot around climate. So adaptation is sometimes a word that's used. Modernization is just one, like especially when in terms of the grid, like how do we make sure that our electricity grid is resilient to wildfires, to storms, right? Oh, we need to do modernization or hardening, right? Those are the words that are used there, right? And then you have future proofing is sometimes a term you might have heard used, right? We're not talking about climate, we're talking about future proofing. So the language is kind of evolving to kind of fit the kind of political constraints we're under here in the US. And some people say, oh, I don't care what language you use as long as we're taking actions. But then I'm like, okay, but then everyone's gonna consider this challenge differently, and there's not going to be the sharing of best practices like we had with sustainability, like we had with net zero, which were actually quite helpful. I think we can say what we want about collaborative alliances not really achieving much, but they created best practices and kind of structures that people could take and embed in their own organizations. And I kind of think we still need that with adaptation.
That is, I appreciate you putting it that way, because that makes a lot of sense. It's very concise. And so, to the question that I had that I alluded to before with a bunch of circles and fireworks, my question is there's people that are building companies that are hard tech, that are making the technologies. There are funders. There's policy. There's people making the regulation. But in this space, when you're thinking about your contribution to climate change, like you spoke to, you're passionate about it. What role, why does journalism, why does media have a purpose in this ecosystem?
Mm-hmm. Well, media is a means of coordinating and communicating, right? And communicating adaptation, which as we've discussed, right, is kind of a complex or ambiguous term. I think communicating adaptation, the need to adapt, the importance of adapting, is essential in order to avoid losses, human and financial, in the next few years. So that communicating function is so important. And if it's not done by media, independent media, then it's done by institutions that might have their own biases or may take up adaptation because it's the hot thing for a few minutes and then drop it again, or you'll have adaptation being defined by groups that may not have our societally best interests in heart, right? And I can't help but think about organizations that were funded by fossil fuel entities who were involved in discussions on decarbonization and net zero 10 years ago, plus, right, who are still active in many ways. So we don't want communication about adaptation to be captured by other interests, especially because one of the concerns about the adaptation conversation is that, if you're talking about adaptation, you're giving up on mitigation, on reducing emissions. And that's not the case at all. But there are those actors who would say, oh, yeah, we can adapt to climate change. We don't have to worry about cutting fossil fuels. No, we don't want that dynamic to take hold. We don't want that message to be the one that's relayed. So media communicating independently why adaptation is essential, what solutions are out there, what you should do about it, I think is so important. And then the convening role is important as well, because I've got a large number of subscribers. I go to a bunch of events on adaptation. It's still quite a small circle, at least in the conference circuit I'm on. But we need to grow it, and I think having building a network based on the media organization is a better way to convene than other entities that, again, might have their own biases in place. So I feel media has a very important role in communicating and convening actors together. And also, like, compiling data. Like, one thing I'm branching into is databases of climate adaptation companies, also kind of creating records of how companies are talking about climate risks in their own sectors. So, yeah, providing like a compendium of references, citations, and hopefully best practices going forward. Yeah, being a useful resource, I think, is what media can do.
Convene.
That's a great word, isn't it? Convene.
No, that's great. No, I love that. So I have two final questions, two of my favorite questions to ask people. And I love so far how we talked about the role of language, how we've talked about your experience with your publication and your opinions about adaptation. I think this is all really cool. And so with all that with all the work left to be done, what is the biggest hurdle at the moment that you'd say you're facing, and how is it also an opportunity?
So I'm facing, or that adaptation is facing?
You, like, with the publication or the company, or however you want to take it.
Well, I don't think it's a surprise. Most companies is the biggest barrier is making enough money to carry on, right? Don't run out of money. So yeah, building up my revenue base, diversifying some of the revenue streams, subscriptions, sponsorship, advertising. I need to build up all those out. And actually, I'm in the process of doing a small equity raise to help support my growth in 26 and 27. So that's a call out to any folks who want to support a scrappy media enterprise.
That's right.
You'll put my email in the show notes, I'm sure. So yeah, for me, it's just putting myself on a stable trajectory, and I'm heartened by the appetite that I'm seeing amongst professional audiences for adaptation information. Right, a lot of my audience are financial professionals. A lot of them are consultants. You know, I've got the McKinseys, the KPMGs, the PwCs on my roster, so I know I'm speaking to the right people and people who can afford to pay for good independent journalism, right? So I feel like I've got that in place. But yeah, growing to becoming more stable, and yeah, increasing the reach, I suppose, increasing the reach and the relevance of my content to the people who can really make decisions, right? Like the chief risk officers at investment houses, or sometimes it's a sustainability officer, sometimes it's like chief technology officer at a company who could actually take adaptation action, right? So actually making sure that my content, my messages are getting to the right people who can actually take action. That's a challenge. And then adaptation in general, yeah, I think we've been stuck in the last year or so, and hopefully we're coming out the other side of it, on like definitions and taxonomies of what is and what isn't adaptation and how to adapt different sectors. And I think we need to kind of out of that sort of intellectual sandboxing into like the action world, right? And you're seeing it. You're seeing a lot of companies who are maybe not saying explicitly that they're adaptation companies, but they're dealing with water risks. They're dealing with wildfire risks. You know, they're creating solutions to real problems today rather than problems that might happen 10 years from now, which is really good. But then we need to kind of like tell their stories and actually explain how these companies are part of a broader movement for climate adaptation. So that's what I'd say on the adaptation front side. We need to kind of get out of the intellectual sandbox and get into the arena.
Well, just like this conversation, I think has been for me and will be for a lot of people. I'm curious what inspires you.
Oh, wow. Well, on the climate front, I will be honest, yes, Greta Thunberg is a big inspiration, and she did kind of light this fire within me. I am inspired actually by a number of independent content creators and journalists who have flourished in the new media ecosystem, right? And I mentioned to you before we recorded about a community I'm a part of independent creators doing really cool things in their own niches, and some of them have got wild success and are quoted or ripped off by the New York Times and the Journal, and some are just really good in their little niches and just really killing a certain market. And it's really inspiring to see other ex-journalists and some people who've never been in journalism before, you know, building these companies, and I get solace and strength from them when things are tough in the climate-proof world. So I get inspiration from them, get inspiration from Greta Thunberg, and yeah, I think, you know, inspiration, knowing I'm doing something that I really enjoy and I think is really meaningful, and yeah, being in control of my own destiny. You know, that's inspiring.
Nice. Well, if there's anyone else that was inspired to follow along with your journey, what's the best way to do so?
Well, I'm always wanting to talk to new folks who are interested in adaptation, so please reach out to me directly on LinkedIn or email. There are a number of events and online events and communities you can become a part of. Again, I recommend doing your Googling, doing your searching for certain communities. And I can recommend the Climate Tech Cities newsletter. So if they cover a bunch of cities in the US and in Europe. So if you want to find a list of events to go to, I met a lot of people through their newsletter events. So Climate Tech Cities, that's a way to reach out this community. And yeah, I'm trying to think. So what else? That's the other thing. Maybe I need to create more convenings myself. I've done a few happy hours. Maybe I should do a few more myself. But yeah, it's a nascent community. We're growing. But yeah, we maybe need to put together a few more kind of universal meet and greets to get this movement really going.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on and having the conversation about it, answering all of the questions about yourself, and then also adaptation and the role of language. And I'm excited to keep in touch and see where it goes.
Thanks, Blake. Really appreciate the conversation. You have a good rest of your day.
You too.